welcome. Good afternoon. So, we're actually sailing from ancient Carthage to the new Carthage, but I don't want to spoil the surprise already. So, yesterday we were in Carthage and we changed the time zone. And the reason, if you didn't like waking up this morning at 7 a.m., which was actually 6 a.m., thanks to the Nazis. And the reason was because during the World War II, the Spanish ruler Franco, he decided to appease the Nazis, avoid Hitler from invading it. So he's decided to change the Spanish time zone to the German time zone. So that's the reason why we had to change the time, and we're gonna have to change it again tomorrow as well. Tomorrow after we're done with the Spain to Portugal. So that's the reason why it is. So if you don't like waking up in the morning, blame the Nazis. All right. So let's move on to Carthage. So the Carthage was founded in the 9th century by the Phoenicians. Remember the Phoenicians from all my talks so far? They've been sailing all around the Mediterranean. Like I said earlier, Mediterranean is a commerce sea. It's a connection of people, while the Atlantic Ocean is much rougher and it's a great separation. We have a legend of Queen Dido. She fled Tyre, which is modern-day Lebanon. And the story actually is originated by the Romans in the Aeneid, where she flees Tyre, and then she falls in love in Aeneas, who was the founder of Rome later. The Romans made this story up to have some kind of credibility as well, because they saw that there are a lot of different stories in the Greek, like the Iliad and Odyssey. They also made their own and Aeneid, also to have the foundation. But she fell in love with the prince from Troy when the Trojan War happened, and she fell in love with him and Aeneas, and he then left to Rome because the gods told him, and she committed suicide because she was so sad. We also have a similar story later on by William Shakespeare about a young lady killing herself as well. But so it's kind of history repeats itself. It's a mixture of Phoenician, African, and Mediterranean culture. If you guys saw it, we were in Tunisia yesterday. It wasn't really a black African black African like we think of Africa. It was mostly the Muslim Africa, so mostly like Middle East. So I really don't consider Tunisia as as Africa, mostly Middle East. So the location where it is, the Carthage is located right here, modern-day Tunisia. And the reason it grew to power is because of its location, and thirdly, location, the three L's in real estate. So it's very, very located in a very, very important place. You saw it's right in between Italy and Sicily, so they controlled most of the Western Mediterranean and majority of the Eastern Mediterranean. But the Carthage is famously known about the Punic Wars. Oh, sorry, the wrong Punic. The Punic Wars. So the Punic Wars, the most famous one was when Hannibal crossed the Alps, so we're gonna get to that. So we have the Punic Wars. So the Punic Wars were basically a struggle or a combination of conflicts between Rome and Carthage from 264 to 146 BC, so about 2,200 years ago. And they were basically crucial in shaping the Mediterranean world, which then Rome prevailed. If Rome lost the Punic Wars, the Carthage will be the dominant force, but the Romans actually prevailed. So the first Punic War started because there were some mercenaries who lived in Sicily, in the northeast part of Sicily. The majority of Sicily was controlled by the Punics. I'm going to call them Carthaginians. And they were basically living in northeast Sicily, and they didn't like the Punic influence or the Carthaginian influence, and they asked for Rome's help. And Rome, when someone asks them to go to war, they always say yes. So Rome says yes, they try to negotiate things, it failed, and Rome went to war against Carthage. we have three major battles. The first one was the Battle of Mylae, and they invented a corvus boarding device, the Romans did, which looks like this. Basically, at the time they didn't have cannons, so they would board a vessel and they would fight with a hand combat with swords and spears. The second battle was the Battle of Sulci, and the third battle was the Battle of Economus. The Sulci is in Sardinia, which is northern up of Sicily, and the southern part of Sicily was Economus. So the Romans actually won all three battles, and that opened the way to Africa. So the Romans saw a opening and decided to attack. Unfortunately, there was a stalemate in Africa. They weren't able to destroy them. They also laid a siege in Libeum. It was also a stalemate. It was a nine-year-old siege. It's located in Sicily, and they were unable to destroy them. And like every war, it ends with a lutations in 241. Sorry, and the Romans had the Carthaginians pay a large indemnity for 20 years. And that is where things get complicated. There's also a recent war in the recent times, the Great War, which we'll call it the Great War, World War I, is when there was a nation, the Germany, and they actually didn't lose the war militarily. They had plenty of military power, but they actually starved. They didn't have enough food, so they, in the recess, and also the communists were coming into Munich, into Bavaria, one of the most prevalent parts of Germany. So the Germans freaked out, and they said to the French, please, we're going to surrender, but please don't make it hard on us. And what the French did, exactly the opposite. They said, you're going to pay indemnity, and then the German economy collapsed, and that was the prelude for the Second World War II. So if they studied the Punic Wars, they probably knew, the French studied the Punic Wars, they would knew what would happen. So in the Punic Wars, we have Hannibal Barca. So he was a Punic. His family owned a large estate in Spain. He was born during the conflict in 247 BC into the Barcid family. And his father made him say an oath, internal hatred of Rome. So there was basically, when he grew up, he was already learned how to hate Rome. And then he rose to power because of his military genius. And I'm going to give you one example. When they went to, spoiler alert, they go across the Alps with the elephants. And when they would go to the Alps, they would find these giant boulders they couldn't cross. And it's either turn back or to move on and remove the boulders. And what he did, he would heat up the giant boulders with fire, and then he would pour vinegar on top to cool them off, and the vinegar, the acid, kind of split the boulders in half. So that was part of his military genius. Some scholars argue it happened or not, but that was basically some of the stories we have about Hannibal Barca. And he was a genius military general as well. So the Second Punic War started, but he was about 35 years of age, and initiated when he crossed Iberia, which is the Spanish peninsula, over the Alps into Italy. Some people think that he crossed through Carthage, even though Carthage was founded a little bit later. And then the major battles that happened in Italy was Battle of Trebia, Lake Terracime, Caen, those are the Carthaginian victories, and then later the Battle of Zama, which happened in modern-day Tunis. Well, I'm going to show you the map, how it looks like. So he would cross over with the elephants in Cartagena. He would go all the way up here to the Alps. He had the battle close to modern-day Milano, and then in the Lake Tercime. He went down to Capua and the Battle of Caen, and then later on, he stayed in Italy for some time, but let me show you the Battle of Caen before we go on. This was considered one of the greatest tactical masterpiece in the military history, and Rome suffered around 700,000 soldiers. They were killed. That was one of the massive battles at the time. And this is how it looked like. Again, I'm not a military genius to explain this properly, but what he did, he surrounded his troops around it, and then he came back on the horses and basically enveloped the Roman army and completely slaughtered all of them. And then he made his way to Rome. This is an AI picture. Most of my pictures are AI. So this is Hannibal ante portum, which means Hannibal is at the gates. And people would ask, why didn't he conquer Rome? He had this massive military power. And the Roman historian Livy, he says, he knew how to win a victory, but he didn't know how to use it. And the reason why he didn't attack Rome, first, Rome was well fortified. And the Romans were extremely good at recruiting people and recruiting soldiers, so they were very good at supplying, and Hannibal had some issues with the supply. And then Romans, when Hannibal was on the Italian peninsula, the Romans would attack Carthage, and they would attack different parts where the Punics occupied, so they were able to kind of disrupt them and kind of spread their resources super thin and able to regroup. And the later on, we have an impact of the war. So what happens is Hannibal stayed on the Apennines, or the Italian peninsula. He would kind of fortify them in certain locations, and he would do raids trying to disturb Romans' Roman supply chains and supply lines. And he wanted to turn the local people against the Romans, but he was unable to do so. And then Scipio went into modern-day Tunis, and they had a battle of Zama, which Hannibal was defeated. He actually did not die at that battle, but he was persecuted, and he went to Greece, and then the Greeks attacked him, and he drank a poison, and he died as a warrior. He was never captured. And then we come to the third Punic War. Basically, the Romans had enough. So Cato the Elder says, Carthago delenda est, which also means Carthage must be destroyed. So the Romans had enough, and they decided to have a complete military superiority over Carthage. And in 149 to 146, they laid siege on Carthage. They blocked Carthage, and they tried to starve the city. And then the Carthage endured for 3 years, but they were unable to fight it off. And in 146 BCE, the Romans breached the city. So they hated Carthage so much, is when they came to the city, they completely destroyed it. So they sold all the population into slavery. And this image right here, they're showing, this is salt. So they're salting the earth. They're salting the earth so nothing can grow at that location. So that was basically the complete destruction of the Punic Wars. And then here's the pretty good animation of the Roman influence. So the first Punic War was happening right here. This is the green is the Roman influence, and this is the Carthaginian influence. So Carthage was much larger empire at the time. The second Punic War, when Hannibal was here, the Romans attacked Spain. And the third Punic War, they completely destroyed Carthage. And this was the Roman Empire in 146 when they destroyed Carthage. But important thing, remember first what I mentioned earlier, 3 L's of real estate: location, location, location. Carthage is a very, very good location. So in the first century, Gaius Julius Caesar, or Julius Caesar as we know him, he established Carthage once again. He started the construction, but it was not completed until Augustus' reign. And then in 29 BC, it was referred as a Colonia Julia Carthago. All right, so those are basically the Punic Wars. Julius Caesar was one of the major generals. We know him from his conquering of Gaul. He did actually massive havoc in modern-day France. He was a Roman senator who was in a lot of debt, and the one way to get out of that debt, he decided to attack Gaul. He found that the treasures of Gaul would be very prosperous for him, and he was actually right about that. He killed about 1 million million Gauls. He enslaved 1 million of them, and he made Roman citizens another 1 million. So about 3 million people lived in that area at that time. He was then later assassinated by his nephew Brutus, or cousin Brutus. Anyway, all right, so we have the establishment of Carthage, and from if you guys went yesterday to the tour, you probably saw most of it. What you saw, except the Bursa Hill, was the was the Roman Carthage. So, and in 3rd century was the Roman prosperity. It was the center of trade, and it was also rivaling Rome for its influence. So basically, it kind of came and rose up again. Even though they salted the earth, it rose up again and became to rival the Rome and its wealth and size, especially because of its location right there. After the Roman Empire became Christian during Constantine in 312 and then 380 became a religion, we have a Christianization of Carthage. So first we have the Milan Edict in 313 AD, and then later on. And we have 2 church fathers, Tertullian and St. Augustine. The St. Augustine's a different one than from the Canterbury. And there were several different consuls at Carthage. St. Augustine, in his book Confessions, he talks about his time at Carthage. He was 17 years of age when he came there, and he spent his time studying at Carthage, so it was one of the major centers. And he also he lived a very elaborate life at the time, and he was not a Christian as well. So his mom would pray for him, for him to become a Christian. And the bishop assured her, he says, the child of so many prayers is not going to go in vain. So he became later one of the major church fathers, but he actually had a pretty good time at Carthage. Pretty good time. So, and then after the Roman influence kind of went on, and the foundation of Constantinople, so the Roman Empire went into the east. We have the Vandals who are coming down, and they're conquering. The Vandals it's a German tribe who coming down from Italy, and they also conquer Carthage again because of location. It was actually the capital of the Vandal kingdom. And one thing that was very interesting about the Vandals, they're promoting the Arian Christianity. So there are 2 kinds of Christianities at the time, and that was before. So in 322 we had the Council of Nicaea. We have the Nicene Creed, where it say that Jesus is the same substance of the Father, God the Father. So there's 3 in 1, but it's all the same substance, and He is co-eternal and the same existence as God. The Arians said that He was a human. He had a human characteristics as well, not just godly characteristics. So that was kind of the big Arian controversy or Arian heresy at the time. And Roman Empire on the east became stronger, and we have the Roman reconquest. This is Emperor Justinian on my right, on your right, sorry, on your right, and on the left is the General Bessarius, who defeated these Vandals. He reestablished the Eastern Roman rule in North Africa, but that did not last long because, if you guys saw yesterday, it's heavily influenced by the Arabs. So the Arabs conquered it in the end of the 7th century. In 698, the Carthage fell to the Arabs, and it stayed Arab until this day. So the Arabs conquered it, and they basically destroyed it, and it kind of started to be forgotten. Oh, the chip's moving a little bit. So Middle Ages, in modern times, the Carthage became less and less important, and we have the modern-day Tunis having a bigger importance, and they became the capital of modern-day Tunisia. And Tunis actually got its independence in, I think, second half of the 20th centuries from the French, and they conquered it in, I think, second half of the 19th century. So the country of Tunis is quite recent. But anyway, until the 19th century, we have the rediscovery of Carthage. And if you guys have seen yesterday, some of you have been on the tours, Carthage is quite big. You have to use a car to kind of get around. It's quite a large area. So we have a rediscovery in the 19th century. The archaeologists started to study, and there were some different legends about the city, about the Punic Wars. People are fascinating with that because they were fascinating wars. And we found the city walls. We found its ancient harbor. It's the circular harbor. I'm going to show you a little bit later. And so there was a lot of links connecting it to the ancient Carthage and its culture. So these are some of the images from the early excavations in the 19th century. All right, let's discover together. So this is the city of Carthage. This is the Google Earth map. You gotta love Google Earth, even though it was invented by the Germans, not the Google, but they kind of stole it and then they sued them. But anyway, they didn't. The Google won the lawsuit. So this is the city of Carthage. This is just a map, just to kind of have understanding of it. And this is a little bit more. So this is the harbor. This is the military harbor. This was the commercial harbor. The Bursa Hill is up here. I'm going to kind of go in order. So the Bursa Hill was the heart of the ancient Carthage. Right today is there's a big church over there, and you don't really have much of the city there. And the museum was closed yesterday, which is very, very hard for me to accept that. So it's located right here, number 18. It overlooks the entire harbor. Our ship was parked right there yesterday. So just to understand that all of this area was ancient Carthage. So it's a very, very massive city and very, very important. The Roman theater, also very a big landmark. It's mostly rebuilt. These are some of the ancient parts of the theater. And this is all rebuilt because if you guys have been there, they're doing modern shows there as well. It's located right up here, so on the other side of the hill. We have the Villa of the Voliere. It's spectacular. They have beautiful mosaics at the side. This is where it's located. And it also overlooks the Gulf of Tunis. And Sanctuary of Tefet. Has anyone been to Sanctuary of Tefet yesterday? Yes? Excellent. So there's a big controversy about it because they found, this is the location, because they found allegedly a child burial, and it was used for a sacrificial place, but it's very hard to say archaeologically if that is actually true or not. We know that the ancient Greeks were actually sacrificing children because they found a child skeleton underneath the temple of Zeus. But this is not the case because this is a cemetery. Those are the headstones. But there's just a combination of a lot of headstones at the location. And the most impressive part of the ancient Carthage, which is a Roman Carthage, was the Antonine Baths located right here on the shore. It is where most tourists were, most tour groups kind of start their tours at the Antonine Baths because it's the most beautiful part of the ancient Carthage. And in order to get the water into the baths, you had the Zuhan Aqueduct, which is located right here. Yesterday it was closed for public. You can just walk to this area, but you cannot walk behind. If you see this little right here, this little dome structures. It spreads out like a massive area. These are all cisterns from the Romans. So they brought the water in because again, it's a desert environment. You need water, and they also even have the aqueduct on the stamps. And oh, we're good. And in the 20th century, became a UNESCO UNESCO site in '79, and there were certain conservational challenges. If you travel in the Western world, you would see that some of the sites are better preserved, and there's more signage. You can actually see the Tunisians are not. It's not a first world country, so they're not. So they have some conservation challenges. We had just mosaics laying there. In other countries, that will be way more preserved than it is there. So those are some of the challenges just we have. Like you can just touch this. In more other countries, you cannot even come close to such a nice marble stone. But in Tunis, it's a little bit different. And then, as we're sailing to the Mediterranean, we come into Carthage or Carthago Nova. So this is the second part of the lecture. Carthage, where we are heading up tomorrow, it's located, Cartagena, sorry. Cartagena, not sorry. Carthage and Cartagena is basically one and the same, but I'll get to that. Cartagena is located right here in the peninsula. It has a natural harbor, which is very important. In Carthage, they had to create their own harbor. They were in the Tunisian Gulf, but they had to create their own harbor. It was man-made. In Carthage, it has a natural harbor, and it was a naval base and a trade nexus for Punics or Carthaginians, and then later on for Romans and Vandals, Arabs, and lastly the Spaniards. So it was originally settled by the Iberians. It was conquered by Carthages. By Hasdrubal, and it was named Carthages by the Carthaginians in 227 BC. It had a very strategic importance just because of its location, and it was basically the Carthaginian base for the expansion. As I showed earlier, Hannibal sailed to Carthage and then started his expansion towards Rome from Cartagena in the Punic Wars. So that was his base city during the Punic Wars, and also a supply base. They would basically bring everything else. And in the city today, we have the Punic Wall Museum. So we have some remnants of the Carthaginians at the site. You guys can see that tomorrow. And then as we had the wars, so the Hannibal was fighting off in Italy. And as he was fighting off in Italy, the Romans said, well, we cannot defeat him here. Let's attack other parts what Carthage controlled. So the Romans conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula, kind of took it for themselves. So in 209, Scipio, he conquered Cartagena, and he renamed it to Carthago Nova, so the new Carthage. That's where the name comes from. So Scipio, I forgot to mention earlier, he was named Scipio Africanus, but he only got the Africanus title after he defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zema in 202 BC. So this is how the Romans did, basically divide and conquer. That was the kind of motto which Julius Caesar later used. So transition to Roman rule. It was part of the Hispania Ulterior province. Carthage is located right here. They have Hispania Ulterior. So again, Romans had different provinces where they would have so for easier control. So this is part of the Hispania Ulterior, and they have a massive structures and kind of constructions of the city. So they would always have a theater. They built different roads, the Roman roads, and aqueducts, of course, to bring the fresh water into the city. So the theater, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, was built in the 1st century. So, economic prosperity under Rome. So what happens is they were exploiting the Apennine Peninsula for, no, yes, the Iberian Peninsula for the silver mines, which is very important to Roman economy. They would make the silver into coinage, and they exported commodities like garum and olive oil. And if you're asking what garum is, it's actually a fermented fish sauce that's supposed to be very, very good. I'm not sure, haven't tried it, but it doesn't. This sounds very good. Fermented fish sauce, and it's part of the Phoenician cuisine. So maybe we can ask the cook to make it for us. Yeah, I'm not gonna be the one to try it first. But anyway, so the Carthage, Cartagena. Cartagena, this is the map, how it looks like. So we're going to be docking right here, so the city is quite close, especially the Roman city. And again, this is Google Maps, invented by the Germans. And so this is again, we are docking right here, and this is the Roman city. Here's a map to kind of explain how things are located. This is the famous theater. They have amphitheater, but I'm going to kind of go through each location. So the first one is the Roman theater, located right here. So probably the closest one to the city. It was discovered in 1988 under a 13th century cathedral. So the 13th century cathedral was actually built quite high up in order to hide the entire theater. Sorry. That was the most significant find, or archaeologists to discover the theater and kind of understanding of Roman Cartagena. And they started to restore the efforts in 1990s, and they completed it in 2003. Excuse me. So that's a theater. It's very scenic. It's not as big as there are other ones, but this one is very scenic and very precious. Because Romans would build theaters. It depends. Sometimes they would use the natural landscape, and they would just kind of build it in a cliff. And sometimes they would actually build the foundations for the theater. So in Carthage yesterday, they had an Odeum, which is a smaller theater. They actually built the whole structure, but it's completely destroyed. I was able to go there yesterday, but and that's why it's not preserved. But the theater was preserved because it was built in a cliff side. So again, it was built in the 1st century BC. It could sit around 6,000 people, so it's not a very big, but also Cartagena was not a massive Roman city. And again, it's used for public games and theatrical performances, not so much gladiator fights. So this is more affluent city. It wasn't so bloodthirsty as the other Roman cities were. The next we have the Roman Forum. It's still preserved to this day. It's the hard and social political life. The Roman Forums have 2 streets, is the Cardo and the Cumanus. Cardo is the south-north street, and then the Cumanus is east-west, but I'm going to get to that in a second. It's located right here. That's the Forum. The Roman Forum is basically the market and the bustling place of the Roman city. If you've been to Diocletian's palace, we also have Diocletian's palace was built like a Roman fort. It also had the whole basic Roman architecture. Basically any Roman cities you go to have the same form. They were very specific how they were built things. There's the Moliente Roman Forum Museum at the site, and we have more than 300 pieces over 3 floors. This is part of the museum. The next is the Curia. It didn't look like this. It was much smaller. It was located here. That was where the local Senate would meet. So that's very important for governance. It was the building where the Senate would meet, so like a governmental building, but it was much smaller than this AI rendition of it. And then also close by we have the sanctuary of Isis and Serapis. Isis is a Egyptian deity. It just shows how Romans were very open in whatever people would worship. So they were not really strict if you were worshiping different gods. So it's a very, very small temple. Again, Cartagena is not a big city. We also have the baths. So we have Frigidarium, which is cold. We have Tepidarium, which is very warm, and then Caldarium, which is hot room, so like a sauna. And the Romans were using that all together. They also had the toilets in ancient Rome. They were also in the open, so you kind of sit like in a semicircular way as well and have a chat with your friend if you like. So this is what's left over from the Roman baths. So the ones we saw at Carthage were much nicer baths than we have at Cartagena. This is where it's located, close by to the Forum, where it's part of. And like I said, mentioned earlier, we have the Commanus Maximum, is the main east-west road in Carthago Nova. Is located right here. So that's the road that would kind of go. They would kind of like meet together. I don't think we have any modern roads that work that way. At least not in America, because there's no walking there. So we have the Atrium building located right here, again close to the Forum. They had very different features, and it was used for banquets. And like with everything else in life, there's also a decline, and we have a decline of the Roman authority. Again, with the 3rd century, when the Rome went Christian, we have some internal conflicts between the ruling parties, and also this kind of the move to the Christianity. And the Visigoths came in, swooped in. They went on the way to Africa. They also established their rule, and they ended the Roman control. But Rome, again, during the Eastern Roman Empire or the Byzantine Roman Empire, I already explained why I don't use the word Byzantine in my other lecture, because German gave the title to it. So they reconquered Cartagena, and they were trying to keep control. But again, I just mentioned it earlier, we also have the Islam coming in and attacking the city, and they captured in early 8th century, and it was part of the Umayyad conquest of Hispania. What the Islamic influence brought is they brought agriculture. So we have irrigation that was used with the Arab technologies. Irrigation was actually invented by the ancient Sumerians about 4,000 years BC. So 4,000 BC, so about 6,000 years ago. But the Arabs, since that's the kind of their world, they were using irrigation in Cartagena. And they expanded the city and fortified the city, so the city had its walls, and some of the walls are still standing today. And then the Christians decided to occupy Spain again, and in 1245 they reclaimed Cartagena. Also, I mentioned the same King of Castile when they captured Gibraltar as well, which was Ferdinand III. And then during the Spaniards, that was the golden age of Cartagena. And the reason why it was a golden age, because it was a port city. And during the time, the Spanish sailed to the New World. So they went to the Americas, because during the line of 30 years, they owned the west part of the world, while the Portuguese owned the east part of the world. And so the Spanish would sail out to the Americas. It was a marine hub, and they were bringing so much gold back that they bankrupted the country 3 times. So this was basically the golden age of Cartagena. In the 19th century, we have the Napoleonic Wars. So Napoleonic in 1803, the Napoleon attacked Spain, and he had conquered the city. And then there was the War of Independence in 1808 to 1804, which Cartagena played a important role because it was the one, it was located on the port, so that was basically a strategic point of for the supply of the Spanish against the French. So those were the two cities that I talked about. Cartagena, Carthage, we were there yesterday, and Cartagena, we're going there tomorrow. The old Carthage and the new Carthage. Thank you very much.